I never thought one phone call could fracture the ground beneath me like that. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was wrapping up some numbers for a quarterly report when my phone rang. Unknown number. I nearly let it go, but my gut told me otherwise. The voice on the other end was hesitant and professional, but he sounded cautious. It was a police officer. He asked if I was the son of Aaron and Lena. I said yes, feeling like I was about to get asked about an insurance policy or a car. But then his tone shifted. He told me my parents had been involved in a major accident, a collision on the highway. The impact was immediate. They didn't make it. My mouth went dry. I remember hearing my own heartbeat more than I heard the rest of what he said. Something about a tow truck. The scene being cleared, my younger sister being taken into protective care until I could get there. I dropped everything. I left the office, I left my laptop and charger, and I didn't even tell my manager. I just got into the car and drove. I called my wife, Lauren, from the highway. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened, that my parents were gone, that Grace, my sister, my baby sister, was alone at the police station. I had to get to her. She was quiet for a long time and then she said she was sorry. I barely heard it. I told her I'd talk to her later and hung up before she could respond. When I arrived, Grace looked miserable. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair a mess, her voice hoarse from crying. She was just 14, still in braces, still sleeping with the same ratty stuffed dog she had since she was 7, and now she was an orphan. She ran into me like her body couldn't move fast enough. I caught her and held on. I didn't say anything, I just let her sob against me, while I stared at the floor, my own grief numb and frozen behind a wall of responsibility. I signed the temporary custody documents that night. They gave me a short window to file for legal guardianship. I didn't hesitate. I'd already made up my mind. I brought Grace home the next morning. She was quiet in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. The house was clean, calm, just how Lauren liked it. She was sitting on the couch when we walked in, arms crossed. Grace gave her a polite smile. Lauren nodded, a tight one, and then went upstairs without a word. I assumed she was just processing. And that evening I made dinner for Grace, mac and cheese from scratch, our parents' recipe. She didn't eat much, but she said she liked it. After she went to bed, I joined Lauren in the bedroom. She didn't look up from her book. I told her I was going to apply for full guardianship of Grace, that I couldn't let her go into foster care or bounce around from home to home, that Grace needed someone who would actually care about her future. Lauren slowly put her book down and turned to me like I'd just announced I was adopting a circus. She said we needed to talk. I could already feel it coming. She reminded me that we had agreed firmly, decisively for years, that we were going to live a child-free life. No kids, no half measures, not even pets. That was the deal. That was the life we built. She asked if I remembered those conversations. I told her I remembered them perfectly, but I never imagined we'd have to revisit them under these circumstances. I explained again, this wasn't about changing our minds. This was about tragedy. This was about blood. Grace wasn't some hypothetical we were debating in a therapist's office. She was my sister, my grieving, terrified little sister who had no one else in the world. Lauren said she understood the pain, but that didn't give me the right to rewrite the rules of our life together. She said taking in Grace wasn't just about grief, it was a lifestyle change, a permanent one, that she had built her identity around never being a mother, and now I was trying to force her into the very role she had rejected from the start. I stood there stunned. I asked her if she was seriously suggesting we send Grace into foster care. She didn't even flinch, said that's what the system was for, that she'll be just fine, because that was exactly why society had safeguards. I asked her if she'd be okay sleeping at night knowing we'd abandoned my sister. Lauren just said she wasn't going to become a martyr for someone else's kid. That's when something in me broke. She had never sounded colder, and I realized in that moment, maybe for the first time in our marriage, that we weren't the same kind of people. I didn't say anything else, I just nodded and left the room. Later that night, I checked on Grace. She was curled up under the blanket on the pull-out couch in the guest room, hugging that old stuffed dog, eyes wide open in the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my hand through her hair. She whispered that she missed Mom and Dad. I told her I did too. And I promised her she wasn't going anywhere, not while I was around. Update 1. Lauren didn't mention Grace at all the next morning. She got dressed, made her usual smoothie, scrolled through her phone at the counter while I fixed cereal for Grace. It was like she had trained herself not to acknowledge that my sister was in the house. Grace kept her voice low as she asked if she could take a walk. I offered to take her to the garden, but she said she didn't want to be seen crying. I gave her a nod and told her to take her time. As soon as she left, Lauren shut her phone screen off with a snap. She said she wanted to talk. I sat down across from her and she didn't waste a second. She said this living arrangement wasn't going to work for her, that the longer Grace stayed here, the harder it would be to unwind from the situation, and I needed to think clearly before doing something permanent. I asked her what she meant by unwind. She said it like it was a business contract, like Grace was a bad lease we needed to back out of before we hit the penalty clause. Lauren repeated that she didn't want kids, that she never wanted kids. She said we'd spent over a decade building a life around that foundation, and now I was bulldozing it without her consent. I told her it wasn't about consent. It was about basic human decency. Grace and I just lost our parents. She had no one. Lauren didn't care. She said the foster system existed for a reason, that someone else would step in eventually, and that this wasn't our responsibility. I looked her dead in the eye and asked if she had even considered how that would feel for Grace, to be abandoned by what little family she had left. She said this wasn't about Grace, this was about us. And if I loved her, if I respected her boundaries, I'd realize how unfair this was. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to get better. That Lauren wasn't just in denial. She genuinely didn't see what the problem was. She believed her comfort mattered more than a grieving child's survival. She ended that conversation by saying she was giving me a few days to figure things out. We had the funeral. I spent the next few evenings trying to pretend the air in the house wasn't getting thinner. Grace stayed in the guest room and never once asked to come into the living room where Lauren watched her crime documentaries with noise-canceling headphones. When I tried to talk to Lauren again, she was calm, too calm. She said she had given it thought and came to a solution. She handed me a list of local foster agencies. I blinked at the paper in my hands, thinking maybe this was some kind of absurd joke. She said she'd already spoken to one agency that specializes in transitional care for teens, and they could place Grace in a home as early as next week. I told her she was out of her mind. She stood her ground and said, "You're forcing me into something I never agreed to. If you choose to keep her here, you're choosing to end this marriage. And I'm not going to be the villain for setting a boundary I've always been clear about." There was no hesitation in her voice, no guilt, no compassion. That was the exact second I decided I didn't want to be married to her anymore. I didn't tell her that right away. I simply told her thank you for her honesty and that I'd handle things from here. She probably thought I was giving in, that I'd come to my senses, but I wasn't. Instead, I contacted a lawyer. I explained everything and asked how quickly I could file. My lawyer told me I had a strong case. I also filed for emergency temporary guardianship. Grace needed stability. She needed a life, not an uprooted disaster caused by one adult's selfish tantrum. A few days later, I came home from grocery shopping and found Lauren packing a bag. She said she was going to her sister's house until I sorted this mess out. I told her there was no mess to sort, that I was filing for divorce. She froze, hands halfway through zipping her suitcase. I told her that Grace wasn't going anywhere. Neither was I. Lauren went pale and then red, said I was making a huge mistake and throwing away 12 years for a situation that wasn't even mine to fix. I told her that Grace was mine, my blood, my family. And what she failed to realize was that her reaction told me everything I needed to know about the woman I married. Lauren sputtered, trying to regroup, but I didn't stick around for it. I walked out. Grace was waiting in the car, sipping the smoothie I'd made her. She asked if everything was okay. I didn't want to lie, so I just said we'd be making some changes soon, and that she wouldn't have to worry about anyone trying to send her away again. She nodded, lips trembling, but she didn't say anything. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Later that night, she asked if she was the reason Lauren left. I told her no. Lauren's heart left long before Grace ever showed up. Grace stayed quiet for a bit before whispering, "I'm glad I still have you." I told her she'd always have me, and I meant it. Update 2. It didn't take long for the aftermath of everything to settle into a rhythm. An unfamiliar, messy rhythm, but one that somehow still worked. Grace started seeing the school counselor once a week. She never liked to talk about those sessions in detail, but she always came back looking a little more centered. I cooked breakfast every morning, sometimes just scrambled eggs and toast, and packed her lunch in the brown paper bags Dad used to doodle on when we were kids. I started learning how to braid hair badly. Grace laughed so hard the first time I tried that she nearly cried. But there were still nights I'd find her curled up on the bathroom floor, whispering to herself, gripping the sides of the tub. I never asked what she was saying. I just sat nearby until she was ready to move. One weekend, we visited my parents' old house to pick up a few more of her things. It felt haunted, like grief had soaked into the furniture. She went straight to her room and came back holding a faded family photo. She didn't say a word, just placed it in her backpack and told me she was done. Back at our house, my house now, Lauren's side of the closet was empty. Her name had been taken off the utilities and mail stopped coming with her last name on it. It was strange how quickly a home could feel like someone never lived in it. The divorce proceedings weren't dramatic. She didn't contest anything. She didn't fight for alimony or property. I figured she was just trying to get away clean, probably hoping to preserve her reputation. But she underestimated the ripple effect. Because once people found out why I filed for divorce, why a 12-year marriage ended overnight, things didn't stay quiet. At first, it was just mutual friends. Some reached out in confusion, thinking there had to be more to the story. A few even asked if I was exaggerating. I didn't get defensive. I just told them the truth. Lauren wanted to put my sister in foster care after our parents died. She said she didn't sign up for this life, and that was all I needed to say. The people who knew me, who really knew me, stopped asking questions. They offered to help with rides, tutoring, and even meal prepping. People I hadn't heard from in years sent messages of support. Meanwhile, Lauren's name stopped showing up in weekend brunch group texts and monthly book club invites. Apparently, everyone thought she'd just gone on a solo retreat or needed space. But when they heard the full story that she suggested dumping a grieving 14-year-old into the system because she'll be just fine, cold-hearted didn't even begin to cover it. She tried doing damage control. I know because she sent me a text, something long-winded about how she wasn't emotionally equipped to raise a child and how people were twisting her words. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Grace had overheard enough from our conversations. She was quiet as we drove to school the next morning. Halfway there, she said, she didn't even try to like me. They had never had much of a relationship to begin with. I kept my hands on the wheel, but I nodded. She said, I don't get it, even if I wasn't hers. Don't people still care when someone's hurting? That hit harder than anything else had. I told her not everyone had the same version of care. And sometimes people show their truest selves only when life stops going according to plan. Grace was quiet for a while and then whispered, I'm glad she left. I don't want to live somewhere I feel like a problem. That was the moment I knew, whatever happened next, I'd made the right choice. One evening, about 2 months after everything, I got a call from Lauren's sister, Amanda. She said she wasn't calling to start drama, just wanted to tell me something. Apparently, Lauren had been trying to spin the story differently, telling people I forced her out, claiming I ambushed her with a divorce because I had pent-up resentment about our child-free marriage all along. Amanda had been polite to her at first, but finally snapped after hearing the version where Lauren said I was manipulative for using Grace's situation as leverage. Amanda said she told Lauren that what she did wasn't setting a boundary, it was abandoning someone who had no choice. But since she took her stand on being child-free, she had all the right to go through with a divorce. It was a gray area. I agreed. I thanked her for telling me. She hesitated before hanging up and said, for what it's worth, if you need help with Grace, I'm not Lauren. I'll help. I appreciated it, but I also knew that Grace didn't need more fractured adults circling her right now. She needed stability, routine, and real consistency. So I kept my focus on that. In the spring, Grace started going to art club after school. She didn't tell me at first. I only found out when I spotted charcoal smudges on her sleeves. When I asked her about it, she grinned shyly and pulled out a sketch pad. There were drawings of our parents, of me, of our little kitchen, of her stuffed dog, now looking almost majestic with shading and exaggerated eyes. I told her she was incredible. She said she was just trying to hold on to memories before they faded. I told her we'd make new ones too, that she didn't have to hang on so tightly to the pain just to remember the love. We went for ice cream that night. It was cold, but she insisted, said it felt like something Dad would have done. When we sat on the bench outside, she asked, do you think they'd be proud of you for everything you did? I didn't answer right away, and then I said, I hope so, but I'm more worried about whether you are. She looked at me like I had said something totally ridiculous. Of course I am. You're the only reason I'm okay. And that was it. That was all I needed. Update 3. It had been a few months since the divorce was finalized, but Lauren wasn't done trying to re-enter the picture. I get a text every couple of weeks, some polite, some awkwardly worded, and occasionally one that bordered on condescending. She once asked if Grace was still staying with me, as though this was a temporary arrangement and not, real life now. I didn't reply to most of them. I didn't feel the need to justify my choices anymore. The silence, I figured, was loud enough. Grace was thriving in her own way. We weren't magically healed, but there was laughter in the house now, music in the background. Little sarcastic comments from her that made me pause and think, God, she really is my sister. She was still grieving, but she was also moving forward, and so was I. One weekend, I had to run a few errands, and Grace insisted she wanted to come along. Usually she hated grocery shopping, but that day she wanted to choose the snacks herself. She was clutching her earbuds and swaying slightly in the cereal aisle when someone behind me cleared their throat. I turned around. Lauren. She looked good, polished, perfectly styled, the kind of woman who made casual weekend wear look expensive. But there was something off in her expression. Tight around the eyes, too much effort in the smile. She greeted me like we were acquaintances who hadn't seen each other in years. Then made some comment about how small the town was, Grace glanced up, recognized her, and immediately looked away. I could see the tension ripple through her shoulders. Lauren noticed it too. She asked if we could talk for just a second. I told Grace I'd meet her at checkout, and she didn't argue. She was gone in under 10 seconds. Lauren sighed like she was the one bearing the weight of some emotional burden, and then launched into an apology that I didn't ask for. Something about how she had a lot of stress back then, how she felt ambushed by the sudden death, the responsibility, the decision-making. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting for the part where she got to the point. And she did. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she missed me, that she missed us, and that maybe we could revisit what went wrong together. I blinked at her. She looked hopeful, like this was the moment she expected me to melt and thank her for her honesty. I asked her a simple question. Would you do it differently now? She hesitated. That split-second pause told me everything. Then she said, I would have handled the conversation better. Not that she would have welcomed Grace, not that she'd have stood beside me when tragedy struck. No, just that she'd have found a more polite way to say she wanted a child out of her house. I nodded. And I told her no, there wasn't any us anymore. There was never going to be. I wasn't angry. I was just done. She tried to say that people make mistakes, that maybe I was just being reactive, but I reminded her this wasn't a one-off comment or an impulsive fight. This was a decision, a worldview. She looked at a grieving teenage girl and decided her comfort was more important than someone else's entire life being ripped apart. I felt a little resentful and, if I'm being honest, abandoned by her. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't insult her, I just told her the truth. Lauren stood there for a few seconds, lips pressed together like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the angle. Then she said she hoped I'd realize I was letting emotions cloud years of love. I shrugged and told her that love without empathy wasn't love at all. It was a performance. I walked away. Grace was waiting by the checkout with a single pack of cookies and a soda. When she asked what Lauren wanted, I just said to pretend things didn't happen the way they did. Grace nodded and didn't ask more. The strange thing is, Lauren's attempts to come back was a gift in its own twisted way. It made things crystal clear. It reinforced that moving on wasn't just necessary, it was healthy. And as it turned out, her appearance sparked more interest than she'd expected. A few days later, I got a message from Amanda again, Lauren's sister. She said Lauren had been complaining that I embarrassed her in public, claiming I was holding a grudge for something she couldn't control. Amanda said she didn't know how to explain to her sister that you don't control how people respond when you reveal the ugliest parts of yourself. You just deal with it. She also told me that Lauren was starting to realize people weren't buying her version of events anymore. She tried reconnecting with her old friends, only to find most of them had quietly stepped away. Apparently, a few people asked Amanda for confirmation. Did Lauren really say foster care was fine? When Amanda said yes, there was no more debate. Lauren thought the world would eventually forgive her, that people would say it was complicated, or that she was just being honest about her boundaries. But the truth was, there was nothing complicated about abandoning someone who needed you. And there was nothing admirable about being so self-involved that you couldn't stretch your life even an inch to make room for someone else's. So no, I didn't regret walking away, and I didn't miss her. Later that night, as Grace and I folded laundry together, she held up one of my old college sweatshirts. I might steal this, she said, grinning. I told her I'd allow it on the condition that she actually folded the rest of her shirts this time. She rolled her eyes but started folding, and out of nowhere she said, I'm glad it's just us. I looked at her and smiled. Me too. Update 4. I posted about this not in a bitter, revengey way, but more like I needed clarity. I needed to know if I was the crazy one, because even now, part of me still had this nagging voice asking if I had acted too fast. This post took off more than I expected. Comments flooded in, thousands. I thought it would be validating. Instead, it left me reeling. A lot of you were on my side, thankfully. You all said Lauren's behavior was cold. Some said she'd never be able to forgive a partner who treated their grieving sibling like an inconvenience. Y'all even talked about your own foster experiences and how being unwanted by a relative hurt more than being rejected by a stranger. But there was another crowd too, the ones that hit below the belt. A chunk of comments accused me of being selfish, that I'd made a life-altering decision without properly involving my wife, that I'd blindsided her, that while her reaction was harsh, my mistake was bigger, making a permanent decision in the heat of a crisis. One comment in particular had hundreds of likes. You didn't even try to understand how she felt. You forced a kid on someone who explicitly didn't want one and then acted shocked when she lashed out. If the roles were reversed, everyone would be furious at a woman doing this to her husband. Another person wrote, you married someone who was clear about being child-free. You changed the deal without a conversation. Of course she reacted badly. Anyone would. Some even went as far as to say that I was manipulative, that I weaponized tragedy to get what I wanted, that I never gave Lauren a real choice and she was right to defend herself. It stung more than I cared to admit. I wanted to scream at the screen. She wasn't some stranger I picked off the streets. She was my sister, my actual family. Would you seriously let a child go into the system just to keep your couch arrangement the same? I just sat there reading, scrolling, watching as strangers dissected the worst months of my life like it was a courtroom drama. I guess I signed up for that. I talked to Amanda, Lauren's sister, later that day. I had sent her the post. She thought people online didn't understand the nuance, that it wasn't black or white, that yeah, maybe I didn't handle everything perfectly, but who does when their whole world burns down in a week? She said Lauren wasn't completely evil, just stuck in a version of life she desperately wanted to maintain, and anything that disrupted it, like a grieving, broken teenager, was a threat to that vision. I wanted to agree. I wanted to tell myself that it was all just one big misunderstanding, made worse by timing and fear. But the truth was, Lauren knew what she was saying. She told me that Grace would be just fine in the system. She didn't just oppose the idea, she actively resented it. And even if I had sat her down and discussed things more delicately, would that have changed the outcome? I'm not so sure. Still, the comments got under my skin and made me defensive in ways I hadn't felt before. For the first time since the divorce, I actually wondered if I had bulldozed my way through the situation. I brought it up with Grace. Not the whole post, just the general idea that some people thought I'd made a big decision without thinking about the consequences. She looked at me for a second and then said flatly, "Would you have chosen differently?" I told her no, that I couldn't imagine her anywhere else. She nodded. Then why does it matter what people who don't know us think? It was simple, brutal, entirely accurate. She didn't say it with gratitude or emotional weight, just a fact. We were here, we were living in the reality of those choices, and neither of us wanted to go back. I thought back to the night I filed for divorce. I remember pacing the kitchen, pen trembling in my hand, not out of fear for the paperwork, but because part of me knew that there was no going back from this. I had no roadmap for what life would look like after. I didn't know if I'd manage work, parenting, grief, and healing all at once, but I knew I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror if I chose comfort over the character. I wasn't perfect. God knows I didn't handle everything with grace and poise. I stumbled. I said the wrong things, maybe even overcompensated by trying to make things easy for Grace when I should have set better rules. But I was there. I didn't run. I didn't treat her like a burden. I guess that's what being a guardian really is, not having the perfect answer, but showing up anyway. Lauren didn't. A few days later, I got a message from a woman who said she was Lauren's old college friend. She told me she'd read the post and recognized the story immediately. She thanked me for standing by Grace and said she wasn't surprised at Lauren's behavior at all. Apparently, Lauren had always been hypersensitive to anything that shifted her center of attention. It wasn't the validation I was looking for, but it helped. Eventually, I stopped reading the comments altogether. The post kept getting traction, but I realized I didn't need the internet to tell me if I'd done the right thing. Every day, I came home to a kid who finally started believing she belonged somewhere, who left notes on the fridge that said dumb things like, "Buy more cereal or we riot." I take that over a comment thread any day. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.